University of the Philippines, Dr. Rachel Ican, Associate Dean, College of Mass Communication. You are now recognized, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
By, present siya. O, sige, ma'am, you are now recognized, please.
Honorable Chair, distinguished members of Congress, ladies and gentlemen, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Correct ko lang po yung sa designation. Tapos na po yung term ko as Associate Dean. I am a Professor of Journalism at the UP College of Mass Communication. I am also a co-founder of Check.ph, isa pong collaborative coalition ng mga fact-checkers dito sa Pilipinas, where we strive to cite or help the public distinguish disinformation narratives. If you allow me, I have slides po for the presentation, if it can be flashed.
Sige, go ahead, ma'am.
Kailangan ko po yung slides kasi yun yung visual, yung unang visual po na
Yeah, technical,
importante.
please. Ayan na, ma'am.
Ayan, salamat. Next slide, please. So I just want to distinguish, so I've been asked to give an overview of the disinformation or the information disorder environment here in the country. And I think it's very important for us to be able to distinguish the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Bakit po kailangan i-distinguish ito sa ating if ever future legislation or any civil society, even civil society actions? Kasi po, iba ang intent. Ang misinformation po, all of this is, yes, they all result in false information. However, the intent is different. Misinformation po ay pagkakamali po dahil we are all humans and we make mistakes. So sometimes we believe something is true, di ba? Yung mga ibang nagkakamali dito nagpo-post ng yung pala hindi totoo. Kadalasan hindi naman nila intentional na ipalaganap ang mali. However, ibang usapan to sa disinformation. Yung mga nagpro-provide ng disinformation, sadya po nilang pinapalaganap ang maling impormasyon para manipula ang public sphere, ang public opinion, or the certain beliefs within society. Ang malinformation naman po ay sadyang nananakit po ng tao. It usually attacks reputations through disinformation. So, nakikita na, for example, ang deepfake ay example po ng isang malinformation dahil you are already impersonating a real person and putting words in that person's mouth. So, ito po, we have to distinguish the intent in tackling the area of information disorder. Next slide, please. So I thought I would just summarize what I have to say in ABCD. Ang abakada po ng disinformation. Ang una po ay manipulative actors. They are people with clear groups, institutions with clear intention disrupt democratic process or the information ecosystem. The second is deceptive behaviors, mga tactic po. And anyway, I'll go through it given the limited time one by one. Can we have the next slide? So I'll tackle it more systematically. So una po, manipulative actors. So as Jonathan had said earlier, dun sa nakasite po sa kanyang study, Architects of Network Disinformation, ito po ay mga institutions, mga tao, mga groups na nananadyang nagkakalat ng disinformation. I listed here some examples of these manipulative actors, such as yung tinatawag or na-label ni Craig Silverman, isang journalist who focuses on disinformation also in the US, na mga black PR agencies. These are boutique PR agencies that really focus on sometimes they operate during elections to either attack or to attack certain individuals during the election period, or feed disinformation in other forms, like in environment issues, health issues, mga ganyan. So sadya silang nagta-target ng audiences. Many of them are not necessarily members or officially recognized public relation firms in the country, but are also ad hoc. And then po yung mga POGO na or community-based fake account operators. No, so ang danger po ng isa pang danger ng POGO ay they have the machinery and the equipment to operate not just online gaming, but they can easily convert to scamming and other forms of harmful activity. And then of course, apart from them, you also have community-based fake account operators. Ito yung mga grupong na-hire, usually kasama rin sila ng mga black PR na siniset up para mag-attack ng or magkalat ng disinformation. Then of course, you have the hired trolls, yung mga tao nila, hired influencers. Now this can be individuals who are selling their platform, no, to the highest bidder, no, to be able to share whatever information their financier wants to give out, no, whether it's just for propaganda sake or it's disinformation. And then of course, yung grassroots supporters, ito po yung hindi ito bayad, ito yung mga nai-involve lang sa disinformation dahil masyadong silang, for example, loyal sa isang personality, no? So kung kahit anong sabihin itong influencer na to, i-echo nila, sort of like blind loyalty. So many of them are victims also of disinformation. Unfortunately, kahit na biktima sila rin yung nagpapakalat ng maling impormasyon. All right. So the commonality here is that they are not operating in and for themselves, but are guns for hire, where the weapon is disinformation, and the aim is the manipulation of the public sphere. Sometimes po we can, next slide please. There is some times when it's state-sponsored disinformation. As we can see here, I have two studies from that were published by the Deutsche Welles about Russian disinformation targeting Germany, and published also by the BBC News of Chinese-led state propaganda and disinformation. Next po, letter B, deceptive behavior. I'm narrowing this down to what I think is the most threatening. First is the inauthentic coordinated behavior. Ito po, as Jonathan had also mentioned earlier, pwede po nating hanapan ng paraan para mabawasan to at to go after those who actually finance this. This is the multiple digital actors working together to create false impressions of popularity, consensus, and authenticity. Minsan po, sa isang opisina lang, kunyari marami silang hawak na cellphone, marami silang hawak na mga mobile numbers, pero sa isang tao or isang grupo lang nanggagaling, making it appear that something is popular or viral. Clickbait rin, ginagamit ito as a tool, whether as a meme, thumbnail, to attract unsuspecting viewers. And astroturfing, it's a creation of or an illusion of grassroots support when it's really just bots and also influence peddlers. As we said earlier, next slide, deepfakes falls under the deceptive behaviors we find in the internet today. Marami po nang nabiktima ng mga celebrity tsaka mga news personalities. Mahanap nyo sa web na kunyari nagbebenta ng mga health products pero hindi naman totoo. Si Presidente po ay nabiktima rin ito, yung if you recall the issue on, may sinabi daw siya sa West Philippine Sea na hindi naman totoo. Then harmful content, see, next slide please. So there are several types of harmful content. I just have enumerations of 8 here. False medical information, incitement to violence, no, ito yung hate speech, encourages and glorifies violence, including suicides. defamation, election interference, financial fraud, imposter content. Yung imposter content, yung nag-hack into legitimate websites and creating a clone website. So, akala ng mga viewers, pinupuntahan nila yung, kunyari, pinupuntahan nila yung Inquirer, yung pala ay clone site siya ng mga disinformers. And then, public safety risks also, yung mga fake emergencies or yung mga fake na humihingi ng tulong dahil sa isang typhoon or whatever, pero wala pa naman sila doon or hindi naman sila talaga apektado. So next slide, some examples of harmful medical content that can be found on the web. Distribution, next slide. Disinformation distribution networks. Like we said, the thing about social media, it operates on algorithms. So, nag-create itong mga algorithm na to. Next slide, please. Nag-create itong mga algorithms na to, ng mga echo chambers. So, lalo nang kung panay disinformation yung laman ng social media mo, then it's likely na yun lang yung nakikita mo at yun rin yung nasa spread mo sa internet. Automated bots also are there to boost algorithm para sila yung nagva-viral at sila yung nag-a-appear sa ating mga social media feeds. And then of course, yung mga paid influencers, because of the number of their subscribers or their viewership, they can easily affect the algorithms in favor of whatever they're posting. And then of course, yung mga fake accounts, ito yung mga either inauthentic accounts or secondary accounts of mga clone accounts of real people. So some policy, next slide please. I'd like to echo what Jonathan said earlier, but I also have of my own here, policy, in my policy analysis and recommendation. So first, there's a need to balancing the need to combat fake news with protecting fundamental rights is a complex challenge that requires extensive evaluation and flexibility and adjustment. So hindi ito black and white na issue. Kailangan po the bottom line is still the protection of our freedom of expression, freedom of the press, especially the right of the people to information. Current laws in the ASEAN, such as the Malaysia's Anti-Fake News Act of 2018 and Singapore's Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or PORMA, while sounding positive in combating disinformation, is more of an obstruction of civil liberties and media freedom. Kung titignan natin po itong dalawang sample na laws na to, malabo po, very ambiguous po yung definition nila ng disinformation. So kahit ano pwede mo siya ipasok. Kahit na legitimate reporting po ng news, especially on areas of corruption or public complaint of, let's say, services not rendered by public utilities, etc., pwede pong masakop dito. So, it's really against freedom of expression. Pero merong silang, well, in terms of PORMA, I will mention a few that provisions that they're kinda okay. But first, emphasis on media and information literacy by involving various stakeholders, including governments, technology companies, civil society organizations, and the academe, in developing and implementing strategies to educate the public. Yung current nating MIL courses sa grades 11 and 12, they are only one quarter, so it's not enough considering that it's now as important as reading and writing and arithmetic, no? Yung 3 R's kasama na dapat po ang media literacy, which means that it's hindi lang po sa grades 11 and 12, dapat po bumaba ito ng grade 1 pa lang ay tinuturuan na natin ng mga bata maging media literate. Penalizing masterminds, no? Especially black PR firms engaged in disinformation. Yung mga influence operators po na sinasabi, there has to be a way to penalize the masterminds rather than yung individual trolls. Kasi wala ho tayong mararating kung maghahabol tayo ng individuals rather than yung nag-hire sa kanila or yung nagbabayad sa kanila. Some solutions in other countries, next slide please. Sa Finland, they have implemented a comprehensive media literacy program in schools and the general population, leading to higher levels of public awareness and resilience against disinformation. Sa Taiwan, they have adopted a rapid response mechanism to counter disinformation involving fact-checking organizations, government agencies, and social media platforms. This approach has been effective in addressing false information quickly. At sana ho ito ma-replicate natin dito, kaya nating i-replicate to if there is collaboration among and support with fact-checking organizations, especially now that Meta has removed their partnership with third-party fact-checkers. Yung sa Singapore PORMA law, they also have applied various contexts of quickly addressing and correcting false information. So meron silang executive rapid response where they publish the correction together with the false information para makita kagad ng public kung ano yung mali at ano yung tamang information. So ito po yung mga aking masasuggest at this time. Thank you po.
Thank you so much, Ma'am. Sino ba yun? Rachel Ican. So, dito na tayo kay Attorney Michael T. Chu, UP College of Law, and then after which we will be proceeding to the government agencies. So, Attorney Michael Chu, you are now recognized by Zoom?
Yes, sir.
By Zoom. Sige.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Your Honors. I will share a presentation as well. Hopefully, it is visible. And I want to acknowledge also that my presentation draws on the work of Dr. Ong, because he has done a lot of work in studying this information in our context, and reiterating as well that there are differences among disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, as Dr. Khan had mentioned. But I want to highlight in this information, for example, from a legal perspective, there should be a justification for the regulation or whatever law that may be passed that targets this information. And it's not insurmountable. There are ways to do that. I think that the first thing that I would say is that human rights experts in the UN system or the special procedures, for example, will say that we do not punish this information per se, but we focus on the agenda and also the intent, which is what distinguishes this information from the others, which they intend to propagate false information for a particular agenda. And I say that because that has to be squared with our constitutional framework on freedom of expression and how expression can be regulated. I want to also reiterate the context that is important here, Your Honors, because while we do take guidance or we compare our approach to the approaches of other states, it is important to recognize that those states may not have as robust free expression environment as we do, or have different histories or experiences. For example, if we look to the laws of Germany restricting hate speech, you will understand why their approach on hate speech is that way, a little bit stricter than most, because of their experiences with World War II and the atrocities that followed, versus the experiences of the United States, for example, which really is inclined to protect free expression in the widest breadth possible. And on that note, a lot of our doctrine and laws in the Philippines hew towards the U.S. approach, not entirely, but closer to that than, let's say, Germany's approach. In the same way that Canada's approach is different from ours because they have specific values, constitutional values that they want to promote, let's say, the protection of democratic society, which is something that we share with them, but that's part of their legal tests, actually. Okay. So just to reiterate some of the ways in which this information is propagated online, and again, I defer to the other experts on this, but these are the ways, and I think we see them being conducted, being done in platforms and elsewhere in the internet. Social engineering, for example, will employ methods that that recreate or that truncates or changes the context, or context is missing, and of course that also transforms particular content through the use of technology. Okay, and these are some of the models. Dr. Ong's work generated some of the models, and I'll defer to him regarding that. I also just want to emphasize that companies should be able to see, social media companies, for example, should be able to see disinformation networks because these accounts are interconnected. See, so often because of analytics and the technology that they use, they will be able to spot patterns in their platforms, and that should be visible to them, and especially when these disinformation networks cross platforms. So for example, in the case of Meta, where you have Facebook and Instagram, they can cross platforms, and therefore it should also be visible to those companies, given that they also use algorithms and artificial intelligence to spot those. Okay, so again, your honors have already stated the effect of this information on our institutions. I will not reiterate that, just to also say that it also has an effect on the population and could be counterproductive to all the other education measures that we have been doing, which means more education than is called for. Okay. So these are some of the strategies that have been offered, and we'll discuss them briefly in a little bit in the context of how other countries approach it. My contribution to the discussion would be to echo that, of course, expression and content are protected under the Constitution, save under exceptions. And this was why I emphasized earlier that disinformation per se need to be carefully reckoned with, because it's such of a breadth that some protected expression or a lot of protected expression might be covered by a law on disinformation. So, but there are ways again to deal with that from the legal standpoint, in addition to the policy recommendations. So we have fact-checking, of course, platforms do that, although as discussed by Dr. Khan, Meta had taken a different path here. Media literacy. So some studies, especially, let's say this case study from West African countries, tell us that when students are taught media literacy and critical thinking skills, they are able to better combat this information, because the end user or those who are targeted with this information are able to discern the type of information that they are receiving. And so again, to the point that was asked in the invitation to talk about education, education is really an important part of it, but really tailored education and also in the formative stages, and also the universities will be very important, because critical thinking is also developed at that level, a deeper critical thinking. So, and then some of these also suggested by our experts. Now, I want to turn to the approaches of the countries, our neighbors, and those who are elsewhere. Singapore, as mentioned, has a law that focuses on online falsehoods that can harm public interest. And some of the remedies in this law will be correction orders. So I think you scale it. And international law also requires us to be proportionate in our response. So if the response to the type of harm can be remedied by a correction order, you don't need to remove it. A takedown order if it's of a graver nature, and then account restrictions would be imposed on such grave offense. So there are penalties involved there. Vietnam also has a decree on this, and it targets interstate service providers, internet service providers as well, and social media platforms, and one of the remedies is removal of content that they define as illegal. Mexico's government has a fact-checking site, so this is also an important countermeasure used broadly, so that there is a government source that counter-checks whatever information, false information is out there. And Finland, as was mentioned, also have national media education policies and new literacies program. This ties neatly into the whole of society or nation approach that was mentioned earlier, because this cannot be addressed by one single law only and penal law only. It also has to be proactive in preventing future susceptibility to this information. Nigeria has a private effort called Africa Check. Canada has anti-online disinformation that has tools relating to different types of specific areas where disinformation happens. And the Netherlands also has a program like Canada and Finland, and they assign this to various ministries. Australia uses a task force to monitor this information, and again, the importance of a media literacy campaign that is meaningful and not just something that you post online and you leave that there. So it has to involve stakeholders like our educational institutions. France has law on election misinformation, so it's very specific and defines particular terms, which we'll turn to earlier. One of the more significant regulations will come from the European Union through the Digital Services Act. Here, the focus would be on platforms, large platforms. I think the threshold is 45 million users or subscribers, and there are certain obligations that are imposed on those platforms for them to be able to operate in the European Union. And just to recall as well that the European Union is an economic union for the most part, and so that's the target. But it also protects EU citizens from harm. So they are obliged to do risk assessments, those companies, to report those risk assessments and to be audited by an independent third party. So, and then if not, then there will be consequences. There will also be penalties there. Germany has a law, as I mentioned earlier, but the context is different. So this is a summary of those. To turn to our approach, and I will go quickly because, of course, as members of the House of Representatives, you are very much aware of these. But we have unprotected speech in our constitutional framework that is already existing. So as mentioned earlier, libel and defamation. So some of the ills or the problems that had been mentioned earlier might already be covered by unprotected speech. So these things, of course, Congress can legislate on, can amend the laws that we already have based as well on case law that the Supreme Court had released interpreting some of these provisions. So these would be helpful guideposts in what is unprotected or protected. The rest that are not covered by those would be protected. And so if Congress, the House of Representatives, decides to pass a law that restricts expression that is not covered by those which are already unprotected, then that law must be analyzed or must be crafted with foresight in mind that challenges to the law that restricts expression might have to contend with these particular tests. And I will not discuss all of them, but the most relevant for us, the Brandenburg test, which is recently reiterated by the court in the anti-terrorism law case, might not be as relevant here because that speaks of incitement. But what is relevant here might be the clear and present danger test. So here, as we can see how the test is formulated, Congress has the right to legislate on an evil that the government has a right to prevent. So that can be very broad. But that legislation can only pass muster, constitutional muster, if, again, the danger is clear and it is present. So my point there is for the legislation to be very, very clear in its policy declaration and in the provisions with respect to the danger that is being addressed and the imminence of that danger. It cannot be something that is hypothetical. And so those are some of the tests that we have, Your Honors, and I'll be open to questions on them later because in the interest of time. But one of the international laws that also govern state conduct is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Here it allows laws that might have an impact on speech as long as it satisfies three tests. The first one is legality. So that means that the law's definition have to be very clear so that the citizen, who in this case we may have an issue of trolls or influencers that will bear the impact, know exactly what conduct to avoid. And that shouldn't also lead to chilling effect. And then the legitimate aim is covered because public order is one of the legitimate aims, as well as respect for the rights and reputations of others, and necessity and proportionality. So the fines should not be too exorbitant, or imprisonment should not be too exorbitant that it's no longer proportionate to what was, let's say, it's misinformation or malinformation as opposed to disinformation. Meta strategy was also discussed earlier. So just breezing through, maybe I'll end here with the final points on what the U.S. had done. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission Act declares that unlawful, unfair, or deceptive acts or practices that includes influencers. And part of the practice guidance here is for disclosures from influencers. I think we've also heard about this case about the TikTok ban in the U.S., and that's coming from a law that protects U.S. citizens from foreign adversary-controlled applications. So this requires divestment, if you want to continue operating in the country, divestment of the foreign adversaries' stake in the corporation or in the application. And that is narrow here because they define who exactly is a foreign adversary. So they identify particular countries. In the case of TikTok, they identify China. And so these are some of the proposals that were mentioned earlier. I will no longer repeat them, but I am open to questions of your honors later. I think the final point is that artificial intelligence might be leveraged for this, but it's a double-edged sword because artificial intelligence had also been used in that disinformation strategy. Thank you very much, your honors.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll be allowing the members to ask questions.